This is a special interview because Arthur Bloom is the writer, and I am a friend of Arthur's, and I'm so privileged to be able to take Arthur Bloom's book, Last Man Standing, called Stories, and review it. And we've just done that as a publisher's choice in our upcoming June issue. But it was a very, very interesting book. This Last Man Standing, I didn't quite understand what that meant until I really got into it. So, Arthur, you've been writing short stories for a while. I know you have some others. And
yes.
How long does a short story take you to write?
Well, first, I'm delighted to be here, Anita. Great pleasure to talk with you on your show and to convey things to the audience. I think in general, there's no one answer to that question because some of the stories, as you saw, are very short. And in some ways, the shorter the story, the harder it is to do it. Whereas the longer stories obviously take more time in terms of the mechanics of it, but they can be a bit easier, more in terms of free association in one's brain and that sort of thing. But the stories in general, I think the book itself, 15 stories, came down to, it took probably 2 years to put the book together.
2 years, and your imagination just flowed all the time, and so you went from one story, and then they're all different, so different that how do you move around like that?
Well, I think that's sort of been the story of my life. I have, as you know, I have moved around a lot, professionally and personally, and and so each place that I have lived, first in my earlier career as a geneticist and pediatrician in New York and Michigan and elsewhere, and of course in Boston, where I grew up, and traveling and living abroad for many years in France, almost 20 years in France. And so the stories are waiting to be told. They come to me as I sit and think in a cafe in Paris, for example. And so some of them were written while I was abroad, and most of them were written when back in the States.
And of course, your titles are good. You don't know what's going to happen until you really start reading them. And I was telling you that I love all the stories, but I guess the one that just absolutely drove me insane because I couldn't put it down, and it was the longest one, was Fast Freddy.
I understand, right. Well, that's one of my favorites.
Mine
that's
too.
One of my favorites. What can you tell me what
let me ask
you, and then I'll tell you.
Okay, well, let me ask you a question. Are you a backgammon player?
I'm an avid backgammon.
See,
I am.
That's
now,
it.
That Fast Freddy is not me, but that came from my imagination, and playing backgammon on the Internet allows the imagination to soar. And so I wrote the story as though, what if Freddy made contact with somebody? What if this helping people on the Internet in the way that he did could be objectified in a bit of a story, and so that's where it came from. Yes, but I play backgammon. I love the game, and we've been playing it in the family for a long time. But Internet backgammon is a whole other experience.
Well,
and the reason I say that is because people talk on as I indicated in the story. People talk when they're playing backgammon on the Internet. And none of that goes on when it's one-on-one across a backgammon table, more or less. So you become psychiatrists to each other, and it's kind of fun.
That's the word, and that's where I want to take off on this. I am not a backgammon player. I don't know how to play. I have never played. I play chess. I played checkers. I've never played that. I played Monopoly. But saying that, Arthur, I could move past not knowing how to do it, but immediately understood what was happening. Here's a man. We don't want to give away too much of the story, but here's a man who really didn't quite know who he was. He was very shy. He was, he was really he didn't have an outgoing personality until he got on the internet. And then he did become a psychologist. And it was amazing. I loved how and of course, I saw a lot of you in that. I know that you're a kind person who does try to help people. You do analyze people. So I did see you in that, but the irony really for me was finding someone very special.
Yes, good. Oh well, I think he becomes an alter ego for me. Maybe my super ego even, but he's motivated so dramatically to help people, the people that tell him their story. And I think that in doing that, he finds the better part of himself, or the best part of himself. And I think I allowed my imagination, to give him the freedom to explore himself in another dimension, to develop the family of people that became his followers on the internet, to have the relationship with the young woman with whom he had the relationship and he married. All of that was fantasy, of course, but I think the natural extension of his personality. I hope.
Yes. And I just want everyone to know that I'm Anita Finley. I'm talking with the author Arthur Bloom of Last Man Standing. It's about 15 stories. Arthur Bloom is a writer, recently returned to his native Boston after 20 years in Paris. And, of course, he has great credentials in a lot of areas. But we're now going to talk about his credentials as a writer. And it is very thrilling to go through these stories because, as I told Arthur at the beginning, they're very different. And the next one that I'd like to talk about, of course, is Vermont Girl. And in the review I did for you in the upcoming Boomer Times, I was very sad after that one.
Yes, I can understand. Well, I think it was a sad story. It was meant for you to be sad after it, because, well, my feeling was that these were two very different kinds of people, and yet they needed each other for different reasons, and came together. She a simple farm girl, and he a sort of world traveler and experienced in the ways of Europe and things, and yet they were closely bound, and that was part of the interest for me in developing that story. But it is tragic in what happened. I won't give it away, but it was a tragic story, and it is all too common, I think.
I was just going to say that it is true that. So it taught me, should teach people that you have to appreciate people you're with because one never knows.
Right.
It was very good.
I think that's right. I liked the character. Did you like the character of the young woman?
Yes.
Felt it was very simpatico.
Yes, very, very much so. I wanted to go out and get chickens in my apartment.
Okay. There you are. Oh, yeah. Life in Vermont is different from life in most places, and it was certainly different from the life that he was accustomed to in Europe, but the life that she led was much more typical, I think.
Yes, and he was so happy. Okay, well, let's move on to something else, and these particular stories I really highlighted in the upcoming book review because the campaign, of course, this is something that you and I were sharing, and you did this in some place in Florida, I think North Miami Beach, but we did it up here in Boynton Beach, and Bill and I had wanted to help the Obama campaign, and we didn't know quite how to do it, and all of a sudden we wound up knocking on doors in an area which was a little bit, I wouldn't say it was dangerous, but it was a little iffy, and yet we got carried away, and we had a lot of fun, and even though a lot of people weren't there, as you intimated in your story, when you get finished, even if you got to 20 people who you knew now were going to vote because you knocked on the door, it was very important.
Very important, very important. And I think it was especially important in North Miami. The population was largely Black American, Haitian American, and Creole in origin. And I learned a great deal from the experience. Their commitment to and devotion to Barack Obama was, and Michelle for that matter, was formidable. Formidable responses to waiting online for wanting to discuss them. They have given that community and others like it around the country a high degree of credibility and acceptance in way beyond the circles in which most of those people traveled in the past. So I found it humbling, to tell you the truth. The degree of commitment that they have had, few of us have had to candidates in the political world.
Right. Well, what happened with us is we parked our car way away because we didn't need to, have anyone see what kind of a car we had, and so we walked, and it was more of a redneck area, and we could always tell, by certain things, and some people, and I'm sure you had this happen, you walked up and they just didn't answer the door. You knew they were in there. You could see them. They don't answer the door. And I understood that. Sure. But we ran out of signs, and it was fun. And so that was an experience, and that's why I was really happy to read that. But I'll tell you the other one that really, really was so lovely. Do you pronounce it Noriko? Noriko. Wow. Beautiful.
Noriko, yes.
Why don't you tell everyone about that?
Well, Noriko is the story of an American who meets a young Japanese girl, a Japanese woman, in the city of Kyoto, and they have basically a one-night stand, I would say. The relationship goes on for years afterwards. But it's that one night, that first night when they met and stayed together, that I focused on in the story. And I tried to catch the Japanese sensibility and the American's awareness of it and his growing understanding of it. But I focused really on just the two of them in that one night. And I think that was one of my favorite stories, I confess, because I think she is so interesting and in a way so alien from his previous life's experience. And so I think, but in the end, the impossibility of the relationship was a very heavy pill, I think, for both of them. But probably wise. I'm not sure it was wise.
Yeah, I know.
That's how I saw it.
I didn't think I would have. I don't think I would have done that. But no, it was you. It was very delicately written. I just have to say your sensitivity, and I know how sensitive a person you are, was so beautiful there. I mean, even describing the bath and how they were getting in and having the tea and I mean, it was I think your success as a writer, Arthur, is that you just make people jump into that page.
Well, wonderful. That's great to hear. Very satisfying to hear that, Anita. I have read. I lived in Japan for 3 years when I was doing some studies in Hiroshima. And there is a particular Japanese sensibility at times, not always, that I got from living there and from really reading heavily in the Japanese literature, Kawabata and others who write in a way that I admire very much. There's a kind of simplicity in the storytelling often, and there's a kind of beauty in the feelings and sensibilities that are expressed. And so that's what I tried to catch. So.
Well, you did, and it was a pure beauty. And you went over this Hiroshima pretty quickly, and that has always been a question that I have, and it was answered there in a way, that how can they like Americans when what happened to so many of their ancestors happened? But as they said, well, they were fighting us anyway.
Yes. And of course, they're very Buddhist in their philosophy about the war. As a dear friend of mine once explained to me, they viewed the sequence of events once the war started as like a river flowing, and really something that could not really be easily diverted or changed. And things happened, and the atomic bombs were things that happened, and all of the terrible things, terrible deaths that they endured at the hands of American bombing, etc. So I think that they're philosophically able to accommodate it. Nobody liked it in the sense of liking all that went on, and there are a lot of people very much opposed to the war. But once it was begun, they are able to accept the consequences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess, and that happens all over the world. Tell you an interesting thing that happened, just talking about being in the war. Bill received a very special award from the French, I guess it's the embassy, a higher position for being in World War II. And at the ceremony at Florida International University, I think there were 8 others at the time, and they had, of course, the French ambassador, the consulate from Miami, and they had the German consulate. Now, when I saw that, I said, oh, this is going to be interesting. Right. Yet he was a young man, and he spent the whole time apologizing and saying what a terrible thing it was, and it can never happen again. I mean, we all stood up and clapped after, but I didn't know how he was going to make this speech.
Yes. Well, and the response, I think, to that is one accepts it, and yet one is afraid, because you look around the world and there are all these things happening like that. You know, you go from Cambodia to wherever, to Kosovo and Africa, and these things happen again and again. So promise what you will. It makes it harder that we're in an age of media, and the attention to all these things is enormous, but still they happen. So the apologies are well meant and certainly accepted, but nonetheless I have a certain skepticism about all that.
Well, again, I want everyone to know that you are listening to Arthur Bloom share his book, Last Man Standing. I suggest that you go on Amazon.com and buy the book. It's only $15, but it will give you many, many hours of smiles, sadness, interest. It really is good. I want to further, before we run short of time, Ibis Isle. Now, when I first met Arthur and his beautiful wife, Deborah, we talked over lunch and we shared something that had happened to him where they had lived, called Ibis Island, right here in Palm Beach County.
Right.
And I was very angry at what had occurred. And he said, I'm going to write a story about this. And I thought, you are? And sure enough, it arrives in Last Man Standing.
Well, I was intent on doing something of that sort to retaliate in a reasonable way. The story is fiction. I mean, I have to say that right up. I mean, there's a lot of feeling in it that's not fictitious, but the facts of the story are fiction, and I think have to be accepted as such. It deals with an issue, the issue of anti-Semitism in a community. And
in this day and age.
In this day and age, I'm not suggesting that Ibis Isle was anti-Semitic in those ways. I pushed this to the extreme and made an example here. But there are attitudes, if not necessarily anti-Semitic attitudes, attitudes of, I don't know, sort of arrogance that I didn't like there. And so, so as I said, I pushed it to the extreme, and I created this tale of a lawyer who's down there and experiences this kind of prejudice firsthand. So I'm glad you liked the story. But it was, I think, maybe one of the more painful stories to write. It called forth a lot of emotions and feelings about the issue of anti-Semitism and exclusivity and things of that sort. Many of which, those things, I've experienced in my travels.
Well, of course, being almost a native of South Florida, a lot in Miami, and I sold real estate in Boca Raton, I was able, when Arthur was first telling me what had occurred to him, I shared some of the stories that I had, not happening to me personally, but that I saw around me, and I was always angry and always in disbelief. And then when he shared his story, I think it was just what you said. It's just certain people have a certain attitude, and I don't know if they'll ever get rid of it, but they do infect other people with that attitude if those other people are weak. And so this is symbolic, actually, of places here, as you said, not only in South Florida, but in other places around the country and world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, in fact, I think the dominant sort of feelings of exclusivity that of exclusion that I experienced to some extent in Florida, I think had to do with organizations and housing and a lot of gated communities that aren't very receptive to outsiders. That sort of thing, more than anti-Semitism, but it's all part of the same. Yeah,
it is. I think
story.
The exclusivity, actually, and that's why we normally, and I don't think we have ever lived in a gated community until just now. We live in a condo with it, but it is not my favorite thing, and yet I suppose there are people who feel there's certain danger and they're being careful, but yeah, it all kind of goes hand in hand. Well, in the book, in the time that we have left, you did say you love Fast Freddy, and you loved, which one now would you like to talk about before we, have to stop talking?
Well, I'd like to talk about A Lady.
Okay.
That is it's a short story, very short story, and has to do with an elderly woman who is put into a nursing home, a rehabilitation center, as they call it, and her relationship with one of the other residents, who is a male, and how that disturbs the equilibrium of the home. At least it disturbs the equilibrium among the staff of the home, and it has consequences for both the elderly lady and her friend, the male, and results in a disaster. And I feel very strongly on this subject because I think it's probably close to the truth of the attitudes of people in a lot of these residences, and a lack of desire on the part of staff and institutions to allow fraternization between the sexes. And I think life goes on, even if you're 70, 80, 90, and for them to arbitrarily cut it off among their residents is, to me, as a human being and as a physician, that bothers me a great deal. So that's what I tried to catch in writing that story.
Well, I caught it because, and being a gerontologist, it really, really piqued my knowledge and what I know that goes on. And as one of the stories I featured, or one of the comments I featured in your upcoming book review, I did highlight that, and I did say very much, and I said that we can't allow this, and it was terrible when that happened. And I wanted to jump right into that page and take that nurse and do something with her.
Yes,
You're
right.
right. I mean, I was floored when that happened, but you're so right, Arthur. And of course, I saw your of course, being a medical practitioner and being so sensitive and being of your age also. As we start to age, we see all these things that people have these attitudes, and they put them on us.
Absolutely. And these institutions write them into the bylaws.
Right.
You sign, as I said in the story, you sign a contract in agreeing to enter the institution, agreeing to become sort of pure, like not like Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, but to give up a lot of yourself for the so-called greater good. And I don't think it's the greater good at all. It's certainly not good for the individual to have to do that in order to gain admission. But they want to keep order. They have people in those institutions often, not always, of course, but they often have a sense of what's right and wrong, and they want order at all costs. So you sit in a certain place for dinner and with certain people all the time. And God forbid there should be variation from the norm.
Well, that's, I've been involved in so many of the senior communities. There's a joke about if, just heaven help you, if you sit in someone else's seat, they come with their cane and they start beating on you because that's my place. But also there is kind of a joke with some of the nursing staff in some places that are either assisted or either nursing homes. They could open up a broom closet. What do you think they find in there? A couple copulating, because that's the only place they can do it.
Well, exactly the way. Well, that's
for your next story.
That's right. I think you caught it just right. Perfect. There it is. Well, and I think the other story that's along a similar theme, but it's not sexually oriented, but it has to do with retirement home, is the story of Jacques the Frenchman.
And I'd like to save that because we've just run out of time, but that gives us some more things to talk about. So
excellent. I
have to say, Arthur Bloom, it was absolutely wonderful. People should get your book, Last Man Standing. Arthur Bloom, go to Amazon.com and just look up the book. It's not expensive, but it's going to give you lots of hours of joy. Thank you so much, Arthur. Talk to you again.
Thank you, Anita.
Bye.
A pleasure.
Mine also.
Bye-bye.
Bye.